let's go live to the Newsreel Theater inside of the Cincinnati Union Terminal.
Good evening. Butler County's railroad legacy traces to 1807 Wales, when the Swansea and Mumbles Railway began a public passenger service using horse-drawn carriages. Its doubtful Butler County residents were concerned about this Welsh innovation, as the pressing needs were homesteading while keeping an eye toward the British. Remember, Ohio was a frontier state far removed from the federal government. American politicians were growing aware the rapidly expanding nation needed a common bond. U.S. Senator Thomas Worthington of Ohio believed commerce was the answer. Consider a flea market with a throng of people flittering through densely packed booths selling goods obtained locally, regionally, or nationally. Commerce connects people, or to put it another way, commerce is the realization of united we stand, divided we fall. Effective early commerce was limited to towns along waterways. Landlocked areas, like much of Butler County, were commercially and socially isolated by a slow, primitive road network. A Hamilton to Cincinnati stagecoach required a bone-jarring 4 to 14 hours, depending on the weather. Man-made waterways were recognized as a remedy to connect landlocked localities with the nation. Nature was still cutting-edge transportation technology. The Miami and Erie Canal opening in March 1828 brought growth and access to distant markets. That 4 to 14-hour Hamilton to Cincinnati Turnpike ride was now a 7 to 8-hour boat ride. Local businessmen began establishing trade with the nation. However, canals and rivers were a part-time solution to a full-time problem thanks to Old Man Winter. Philip Thomas's brother regaled a fall 1826 Baltimore, Maryland dinner party with George Stephenson's Stockton and Darlington Railway that moved passengers and freight with a steam locomotive on iron rails. Philip Thomas realized this was how Baltimore could beat out New York and Philadelphia for Ohio goods, as a trip from Dayton to Baltimore was far slower than the 20 days required to reach New York City. Philip Thomas's call to action was answered in February 1827 with the charter to build the nation's first public railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio. Construction began July 4, 1828, 4 months after the Miami and Erie Canal linked Butler County to the nation. The B&O also brought a romanticized, glorious revolution against the horse and buggy. Author Stephen Ambrose summarized our national condition best. Mankind could, for the first time, travel faster than the speed of a horse. The state of Ohio funded and constructed modern canal system became a distant memory within a few years. Railroad fever reached the Ohio capital, causing the legislature to authorize the first railroad within the state on February 23, 1830, to be named the Ohio Canal and Steubenville Railroad. This charter was passed before a B&O passenger train left the station and was less than 2 years after the Miami and Erie Canal opened. 2 important questions need to be asked. First, why did the railroad's name include canal? 1830 Ohio relied upon rivers, canals, and lakes to connect with the nation. Waterway transportation was the backbone upon which our country was forming. Thus, and this is very important, the railroad was considered an extension of our waterways. In other words, the railroad served the canals, rivers, and Great Lakes. Second, why was state legislature involvement required? President James Monroe's veto of the 1822 law to give government the power to force citizens to sell land for a national road exemplified the tension with government forcing citizens to sell their property for a common public purpose. The utilitarian demand for public transportation slowly pushed President Monroe and others toward accepting legislation, known as charters, to permit the forced sale of private land to a private or public corporation to build a public transportation system. A railroad charter is the equivalent to a birth certificate, Social Security card, and passport that contains aspects on where the railroad will be built, how it's funded, who can own the railroad, and how much it can charge for services. Early railroad terminals were often cities on a waterway, with their name reflecting characteristics or locations on the route. The charter also gave permission to survey and purchase private land, hire and fire employees, cross waterways and streets. However, early Ohio railroads were not permitted to construct or operate across state lines. Railroads were permitted to raise money by selling stocks or later selling mortgage bonds. The highlighted text outlines the stock subscription process, which was where failure often occurred. The first railroad into an area benefited from public excitement at the opportunity to travel faster than a horse. Families often made a small subscription as an investment. Businessmen made large subscriptions on the promise of reaching distant markets. Other unscrupulous men viewed the railroad as a get-rich-quick scheme. Local governments were forbidden from making a subscription without Ohio General Assembly approval. The Eaton and Hamilton, Butler County's second railroad, was the beneficiary of such a legislative act, whereas the CH&D was entirely privately funded. The charter process was streamlined by the 1851 Ohio Constitution, allowing railroad incorporators to replace the legislative routine of debates, committees, and votes with sending paperwork to the Ohio Secretary of State. The railroad became a corporation when enough stock subscriptions were sold, allowing shareholders to meet and elect officers. The caveat: only stock subscribers current on their subscription payments were considered shareholders. News of the company vote was published in local newspapers, the only form of 1800s mass media, causing towns along the envisioned route to begin media campaigns, enticing the railroad to their community with promises of buying stock, land, or building an unsanctioned railroad. Intense rivalries between communities soon developed that could not be settled on the field under Friday night lights. Their dreams of a railroad were often whimsies floated by hope. Surveyors plotting the best route across the land were met with cheers or jeers. The 1849 CH&D survey party encountered a bellicose farmer who ripped out survey stakes placed a few moments earlier, as the farmer knew he was powerless to stop the railroad from buying his land. This application of government-authorized force planted seeds of resentment toward future railroads that required laws to refine the eminent domain process. Those gaining the railroad received prosperity, jobs, and growth. The rejected were left with disdain, hatred, and jealousy. Once the route was established and land purchased, earnest railroad construction could begin. Early American trains were horse-drawn wagons pulled along iron straps nailed to timber. Steam locomotives and iron T-rails bought from England gradually replaced the horse and strap irons in the late 1830s, as America lacked the ability to produce either in earnest until the 1840s. The rapid growth of locomotives, cars, and trains forced track structural improvements. Butler County steam finally met steel rails in the 1870s. The Miami River Valley gives Butler County a natural transportation route, allowing Hamilton and Middletown to become excellent transportation hubs between canal, turnpike, and railroad. Area creeks offered gently sloped, winding routes into 7-mile Somerville, Dartown, Oxford, and Westchester. Riley, Okeana, Shandon, Maud, and Monroe were besieged by sharp valleys carved by small creeks that limited transportation to turnpikes for several decades until engineers created methods of bridging these features. Early railroad construction was a dangerous, laborious affair. Everything was done by hand or animal power from sunrise to sunset, regardless of season or weather. Horses pulled material to the site to be offloaded by the wooden poles seen on screen. Gangs of men toiled long hours to lay the road of progress. German and Irish immigrants were persuaded that the American dream was as a construction laborer living in a tent city comprised of dining and sleeping quarters, a camp store, the world's oldest profession, a watering hole, and traveling preachers. Air conditioning was a breeze in summer, Winter heat was several layers of blankets and clothing. Camp Plumbing was a nearby stream and outhouse. Later construction camps had dank, smelly barracks cars filled with bunks. Dysentery, tuberculosis, and smallpox were other unwelcome camp features. The dynamic of time as money was the reason many railroad contractors delivered a barely passable set of rails that often took years of rebuilding to create a world-class route that often exceeded the original budget. The Ohio Railroad Commission found actual construction averaged 4 times higher than the original estimate. When the money ran out, the company could press forward and issue more mortgage bonds and stocks or cease construction. It took a tough, dedicated group of visionary Butler Countyans to build a railroad. The B&O success brought excitement to Butler County that energized a December 1835 Hamilton meeting giving birth to Butler County's railroad legacy. Hamilton historian Alta Harvey Heiser noted delegates from all over southwestern Ohio attended the meeting, including railroad monarch John Woods. Legend holds Hamiltonian Henry Earhart approached John Woods sometimes afterward to link Hamilton and Cincinnati by rail to further the city's growth beyond its Miami and Erie Canal. John Woods, then Ohio State Auditor, agreed and requested Henry Earhart join John Irwin to survey from the end of the South 3rd Street graveyard in Hamilton towards Cincinnati in fall 1845. Along the way, they encountered a farmer who recommended the party be committed to a lunatic asylum. Before continuing, we must address the internet legend of CH&D founder John Alexander Collins. A Wikipedia article based on a plaque on John Alexander Collins's obelisk in Dayton's Woodland Cemetery claims he founded the CH&D. This is incorrect based upon Mr. Collins's obituary stating he lived in Massachusetts when the CH&D was chartered. Mr. Collins didn't move to Cincinnati until September 1851, when future CH&D president Daniel McLaren got him a job as a locomotive engineer. Plus, the charter, written by John Woods and Lewis Campbell, never mentions old Jack Collins. Lewis Campbell became the Cincinnati and Hamilton's first president in January 1847, and Dayton was added to the name the following March. Mr. Campbell's passion, however, was politics, which caused him to leave the company. His replacement was found in Cincinnatian Stephen Lahamadou, or Mr. L.H., on July 4, 1848. Mr. L.H.'s first task was resolving several court battles with landowners that he later said delayed construction. Canal and turnpike supporter criticism made selling stock subscriptions harder. Mr. L.H., despite these headwinds, convinced renowned engineer Robert Schumacher to join the CH&D in March 1849. Mr. Schumacher swiftly finalized the Hamilton to Cincinnati route along the western Mill Creek Valley in June 1849, boosting investor confidence. The Hamilton to Dayton route was complicated by an intense newspaper campaign between lower Miami Valley cities to bring the CH&D to their citizens. Robert Schumacher ended this competition in May 1850 when he declared the CH&D would be built along the Miami River west bank through Trenton and Carlisle, before crossing the Miami River in Dayton. The western route was longer, yet flatter, straighter, and easier to build than eastern bank alignments through Middletown and Miamisburg. Andrew DeGraff's company began work south from Hamilton in March 1850. Contracts for the Hamilton to Dayton segment soon followed, but work was halted until September 1850 by the third cholera epidemic to strike the region in as many years. The next 12 months saw Hamilton's western canal basin filled in, a gravel pit near present-day South Hamilton Crossing, and more lawsuits. More trouble arrived for Mr. L.H. when iron rails failed to arrive from England. Iron T-rails would not be forged in Cincinnati until 1855. However, he was able to secure a second shipment that arrived in August 1851, which brought several unofficial local excursion trips on the new rails. September 1851's morning was filled with excitement as the locomotive pioneer led a grand pageantry of trains from Cincinnati filled with dignitaries, bands, an artillery company, and a Northwest Territory pioneer. Another train dashed south from Dayton with similar exuberance. Old Jack Collins and his friend Daniel McLaren were 2 of 5 engineers driving their trains, past crowds excited to see the great iron horse whoosh by, offering smoke, steam, and the future at an astonishing 30 miles an hour. Destination, Hamilton. The grand fleet arrived an hour later to celebratory cannonades, music, and speeches before thousands of revelers ushering in a new era. A local porkhouse provided a free evening feast served on fine china for all attendees. On this day, grievances were replaced with fellowship. The citizens of Butler County were united. Henry Earhart, originator of the CH&D idea, sold the first passenger ticket at Hamilton the following day, with passenger service beginning 2 weeks later. Freight trains followed in December 1851. Hamilton became a true railroad town when her depot was finished the following year. The CH&D's success drew a unique, troubled railroad to seek a connection with it in Dayton during the Civil War. Ohio law required railroads to be built to the Ohio gauge, or 4 feet 10 inches. This law was repealed in 1852, allowing railroads, such as the broad gauge Atlantic and Great Western, to build across Ohio in the 1860s toward Dayton. Mr. L.H. saw an opportunity to capture New York traffic and made an agreement in 1864 to add a 6-foot 0-inch broad gauge on the CH&D between Dayton and Cincinnati, making the line a rare dual-gauge railroad for over a decade. When the Erie-controlled A and GW switched to standard gauge, a gauge established by the 1862 Pacific Railway Act, the broad gauge rails were removed. The CH&D switched to standard gauge by June 1883. Local investors owned the company until the Vanderbilts concocted a scheme to merge the CH&D and CC&C into the Ohio Railway. The scheme failed due to meddling from the Erie Railroad. The CH&D was tossed around like a schoolyard kickball the rest of its existence. However, the company went on to own 27 companies, covering 1,100 miles from Ohio to Illinois by 1904, a year marking a high and low for the railroad. In 1904, CH&D Vice President Eugene Zimmerman, burdened by a deadbeat English aristocrat son-in-law, an English castle renovation obsession, and greed, pulled a Nero and financially burned the company to the ground. Zimmerman then tricked the Erie to purchase his wreck based upon the assurances of J.P. Morgan. The Erie informed J.P. Morgan of Zimmerman's treachery, causing Morgan to repurchase the CH&D within months. Zimmerman's deception earned him a historic dressing down by J.P. Morgan that was heard across the street. In 1909, J.P. Morgan manipulated the B&O into a delayed purchase agreement that was finalized on July 27, 1917, leading to the line's current ownership by CSX. Eaton's venture into railroading started in 1831 when city leaders hosted the region's first railroad convention. 16 years later, a bevy of Preble County residents, led by Abner Haynes and Joseph Hawkins, sponsored the Eaton and Hamilton Charter to construct between its namesake cities for $350,000, or $13.4 million today. CH&D survey alums John Irwin and Henry Earhart located a route between Eaton and Hamilton along the temperamental 7 Mile Creek. Concerns were expressed over the severe grades between 7 Mile and Eaton, along with the 9 bridges within 18 miles to cross 7 Mile Creek. President and Northwest Territory pioneer Cornelius Van Austell ordered more surveys that confirmed Irwin and Earhart's route was the best, and the railroad urgently needed more money. Abner Haynes became president within a year of the railroad's incorporation, accomplishing several victories, including an 1851 charter revision, increasing capitalization to $2 million, or $81 million today, permission to extend north from Eaton toward the Indiana border at Richmond, and south from Hamilton to Cincinnati, which allowed the railroad to receive a desperately needed cash infusion from the city. Plus, Haynes acquired English iron rails without making a down payment. However, Haynes understood if the railroad was to succeed, it needed more front office talent. Rumors swirled that John Woods was tired of Ohio State auditor life. Abner Haynes quickly convinced the monarch of railroading to become the railroad's next president in December 1851. John Woods' first day on the job revealed a railroad deeply in debt. Regardless, his renowned business savvy and leadership got the railroad open between Hamilton and Somerville by May 1852, then Eaton 2 months later. The inaugural train from Hamilton to Eaton rivaled the CH&D's celebrations only 10 months earlier. The railroad's profitability depended on the success of Butler County's breadbasket. 7 Mile became the Corn King, Collinsville the Flour Queen, and Somerville the Duke of Oats and Barley. However, a failed harvest guaranteed the financially frail railroad a year of pain. John Woods' presidency was complicated by a shareholder faction obsessed with constructing a branch between Eaton and Piqua. Mr. Woods responded the railroad did not have the money to spare on an ill-advised adventure. The pro-Piqua branchers replaced John Woods as president in 1853 with David Barnett. Barnett's administration wasted time and money on the failed Piqua branch, but kept the railroad financially viable through the first worldwide economic depression and several poor harvests until June 1859, when an investor lawsuit forced the first of several financial restructurings. David Barnett's reign was brought to a poetic end when CH&D debt holders, led by Mr. L.H., gained control in 1863, leading to its formal purchase in May 1866 and renaming it Cincinnati Richmond and Chicago Railroad, or CR&C. The CH&D brought new life to the line over the next 22 years until the Napoleon of Wall Street, Henry Ives, with financial backing from Jay Gould, took over the CH&D in 1886, leading to an Enron-level fraud. This well-timed chaos created an opening for a Pensy takeover. The Pensy was caught flat-footed after the Uncivil War by Jay Gould's empire threatening to swipe western traffic from Pittsburgh toward the Erie Railroad. The Pensy spent the 1870s leasing several railroads to form trunk lines between Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. Freight agreements with the CH&D and the CH&D-controlled CR&C solidified a valuable trunk line between Cincinnati and Chicago. This agreement worked well until former Little Miami, a Pensy-controlled railroad, and Erie Railroad president Hugh Jewett became CH&D's 7th president in 1883. Hugh Jewett ripped up the decades-old Pensy traffic agreement, causing the Pensy to route Chicago traffic over the longer Little Miami line into Cincinnati. Jewett's motives may have been influenced by Jay Gould, or the Pensy creating the Chicago, St. Louis, and Pittsburgh Railway, or CSTL&P, in 1880 to combine smaller railroads to form the missing Chicago to Cincinnati trunk line. Evidence also suggests Pensy made several unsuccessful bids to purchase the CR&C in 1882 and 1883. By 1884, however, the CSTL&P was in Richmond, Indiana, and directly connected to the CR&C. The Cincinnati and Richmond, or C&R, was CSTL&P's Ohio plan to enter Cincinnati. Surveyors settled on a route along the eastern Mill Creek Valley, then following the Miami and Erie Canal eastern bank into Hamilton, where a city council under CH&D influence caused an unavoidable problem. Hamilton, by 1884, had sprawled across much of the intersection between the Miami River and Mill Creek valleys. Going south or north of the city required navigating hills or crossing an uncooperative CH&D. This situation gave city leaders leverage to require the Pensy find a route through town that did not destroy any houses. Pensy engineers located the C&R on state-owned Miami and Erie Canal property through Hamilton, avoiding further conflicts. This involved a long timber trestle over a canal extension, later filled in to create Fifth Street, and a sharp, short curve with grade to reach a bridge over the Miami and Erie Canal. This section later proved troublesome for Pensy's grand T1 steam locomotives. Construction swiftly progressed from eastern Cincinnati in May-June 1887. Astonishingly, construction of 23 miles to Hamilton was completed in June 1888. The CH&D immediately lost its 37-year monopoly over Hamilton. However, the timing of the project is interesting when placed in the context of Henry Ives' schemes. Henry Ives gained stock control of the CH&D in 1886 with a goal to raid a cash-rich railroad in furtherance of his scheme to acquire the B&O and TH&I, a St. Louis to Indianapolis line. The plan worked until Ives angered the Pensy, who in turn caused J.P. Morgan to call in several Ives loans. Ives' historic implosion made the CH&D vulnerable to a Butler County Pensy lawsuit, courtesy of bribed Cincinnati conman George Duckworth, acting as a bereft CH&D stockholder. Duckworth's efforts forced the CH&D to sell the CR&C to Pensy for $400,000, or $13.2 million today, completing their Chicago to Cincinnati trunk line. The line was successfully operated by the Pensy until the Penn Central debacle found it near ruin. Norfolk Western bought the line and rejuvenated it as a link to the former Wabash properties in northern Indiana. Ironically, Norfolk Southern would have obtained the route in either scenario. Hamilton journalist Jim Blount described this railroad between Hamilton and Middletown as mysterious. Others called it a mistake, pumpkin vine, grapevine, or long, crooked, and dirty. Let me add another term: intentional. Popular rumor holds Willie McCracken and Colonel John Fawcett wished to build a railroad between Dayton and St. Louis. And by the way, when searching for a picture of Colonel John Fawcett, Google insisted I meant actress Farrah Fawcett. The duo developed a vaudevillian act starring Colonel Fawcett as president, a local businessman as vice president, with McCracken as financier and construction contractor. He cannot be a good robber baron without self-dealing. Their numerous administrative filings in Indiana and Ohio that exchanged charters, ownership, and names make it hard to determine when the Louisville, Cincinnati, and Dayton originated. Their idea from the outset was likely not to build and operate a railroad. Rather, it was to create the illusion of competition to force cash-rich railroads to buy their business. Essentially, McCracken was copying schemes employed by Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould, called a nuisance road, to manipulate an established railroad into an unnecessary purchase at a super inflated price. CH&D's Hamilton monopoly and CC&I's Middletown monopoly made Butler County a perfect target. P.T. Barnum-worthy pompous promotions soon appeared in local newspapers, grabbing public attention, including Middletown businessmen Charles Gunkel and Paul Sorg, who sought an alternative to the CC&I in Middletown. Construction in summer 1886 followed the Miami and Erie Canal from Hamilton to Middletown. McCracken's self-dealing shenanigans soon caused unpaid workers to strike, Ohio Board of Public Works ire over damaged canal property, and a Middletown Cemetery Association lawsuit for land taken without permission. Construction proceeded despite these setbacks as McCracken cut every possible corner to produce a barely functional railroad. The line was renamed Cincinnati and Dayton a day before operations began on April Fool's 1887. The media blitz of threats forced the CH&D to purchase the route in February 1888 for $400,000, or $13.2 million today, giving T. McCracken a tidy $150,000 profit to go with revenue from selling debt and stocks. A good robber baron knows how to self-deal. The CH&D spent thousands refurbishing the line, improving service to several industries in Woodsdale Island Park. A 1928 reconfiguration by the B&O created a vital link between New Miami's Coke Auto and Middletown's Armco. 3 decades after Coke Auto's closure, CSX still sends several trains over the line every day. Oxford's railroad fever was lifted in March 1849 when 2 railroads were chartered to build through the city within a week. The Junction Railroad was an extension of its Indiana namesake, aiming for the CH&D at Hamilton. The 4 Mile Valley Railroad was planned to connect Richmond and Cincinnati via Oxford and Dartown. Its organizers later added an Indiana railroad partner to attract investors. The railroads became immediate rivals over land, money, and John Woods' attention. 4 Mile Valley's William Kennedy struck first by hiring CH&D engineer Mr. Jacques in May 1849 to strengthen the front office as it pursued Mr. Woods. They soon finalized a route through the county, blue line on screen, over the best path between Oxford and Hamilton. The Hamilton to Cincinnati portion would, like the later C&R, follow the canal. Junction Railroad President Jonathan Ridenhour scrambled to catch up, offering to jointly construct and operate a line between Dartown and Hamilton, including through proposed Eaton Road Hill Tunnel. The 4 Mile Valley rebuffed the offer. Re-enter John Woods, who, according to legend, recommended the Junction Railroad cross the Miami River in Hamilton over a tall bridge, engineered by John Earhart, to create a reasonable climb from Hamilton to Oxford. This advice finalized the Junction Railroad's route, yellow line on screen, to meet her Indiana namesake at College Corner. A late 1851 rumor spread concerning John Woods' desire to return home. The 4 Mile Valley quickly offered him the presidency, only to be rebuffed as Mr. Woods thought the company's focus was too local. The E&H's employment offer to John Woods returned everyone's attention to grinding for dollars from financially depleted county residents, fresh off supporting the CH&D and E&H, a canal, bridges, and turnpikes. 1853 opened with E&H firing John Woods, which allowed the Junction Railroad to successfully hire the now famous railroader. Mr. Woods parlayed his relationship with CH&D's Mr. L.H. into financial support and a commitment to build the Hamilton connection eastward from the Miami River. The 4 Mile Valley found itself behind its resurgent rival and started work on the Eaton Road Hill Tunnel and grading toward Dartown, hoping to attract investors. The gambit failed, forcing the cash-strapped railroad to cease all work within months. The road to Oxford could only be laid by John Woods. John Woods ground through financial hardship and combative contractor William Higton until a fateful day in July 1855 when he contracted a deadly illness from a construction camp visit to quell Higdon's unpaid employees. William Miller, John Woods' energetic son-in-law, became the next president and immediately fired William Higdon. Philip McGonigal, namesake of the town and siding, was one of several contractors who replaced the malignant Higdon. The line was finally put into service on a warm June 4, 1859 morning, when 2 passenger trains climbed from Hamilton toward Oxford. Butler Countyans, now expert revelers, filled Oxford streets with music, jubilation, and speeches culminating with a grand feast in Miami University's Old Main Hall. The Junction Railroad allowed agricultural products to flow from the region and passenger trains with Miami University students bound for Oxford. However, revenue from these seasonal trains combined with the unnecessary branch line construction from Connorsville, Indiana to Fort Wayne, Indiana, allowed bondholders to force the line into receivership with an eye toward acquisition. The CH&D was manipulated into purchasing the Junction Railroad well above market value in December 1872 by its stockholders who were also Junction Railroad bondholders. The railroad was renamed Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Indianapolis, and later the Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Western, or CI&W. The CH&D, never able to turn a profit on the line, spun off the route during its final receivership in 1916. The new CI&W was slightly more successful, but financially manipulated by the B&O until it acquired the line in 1928. CH&D engineer Robert Schumacher's May 1850 recommendation to bypass Middletown angered the populace to build their own short-line double-track railroad named the Dayton and Cincinnati in 1852. Cincinnatian Erasmus Guest proposed a route east of the Miami River through Miamisburg, Middletown, Sharonville, and through a 2-mile tunnel under Walnut Hills to connect with the Little Miami Railroad in eastern Cincinnati. Mr. Guest's proposal was welcomed by townspeople, shunned by farmers, and met vocal opposition from the Middletown Canal faction, who argued the railroad would destroy taxpayer equity in the state-owned canal system. Their cries did nothing to dampen the city's excitement. Mr. Guest's work earned him a $1.7 million, or $69 million today, construction contract in October 1852 to build the short line. Mr. Guest's company was bankrupt within a year after discovering the earthwork more extensive than first estimated. The next contractor spent $3 million, or $122 million today, and a year that barely moved the project forward. The Dayton and Cincinnati also faced a CH&D-sponsored negative newspaper campaign that caused the project to fail in 1860 with only a dirt path and 3 holes in Walnut Hill as a remembrance. The 1860s brought 2 things: Middletown's explosive industrial growth courtesy of the Miami and Erie Canal system, and the Vanderbilt Empire gaining control of the Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis, or CC&I, which brought their influence into Dayton. The Ohio legislature and attorney general told Cornelius Vanderbilt and Son to stop taking over Ohio railroads, or else. The Vanderbilts used an existing agreement between the CC&I and the CH&D to enter Cincinnati, while they developed a more palatable solution that involved finding a trusted local proxy to run an independent railroad in their favor between Dayton and Cincinnati. Their search ended with the appointment of legendary railroader Robert Schumacher as president and chief engineer of the Cincinnati and Springfield Railway, or C&S. Vanderbilt proxies obtained the Dayton and Cincinnati charter rights through a series of mergers and lease agreements. The legal maneuverings also allowed the C&S to reuse Erasmus Guest's route from Dayton to Sharonville, where Robert Schumacher deviated to follow the eastern Mill Creek Bank into Cincinnati in lieu of wasting money on Guest's Walnut Hill Tunnel. Backroom Vanderbilt financing allowed construction to continue unabated during 1871 through 1872. According to Middletown journalist George Kraut, Mr. Schumacher chose a well-skilled construction crew, including the legendary John Henry, who would go on to steal the steam from a drill meant to replace him at C&O's Big Bend Tunnel in 1873, West Virginia. And no, John Henry did not die after that triumph. Immediately before C&S official opening on July 4, 1872, it was revealed Vanderbilt CC&I had indefinitely leased the railroad. Consequently, Robert Schumacher went from 1850 to 1872 hero with Middletonians. Lemon, Liberty, and Union Township residents were now able to catch the railroad from stations named Maud, Westchester, and Gano to Middletown, Hamilton, Oxford, and beyond. Joshua Hughes and Thomas Kyle provided land for county locations that still carry their names. Joshua Hughes' brother Christopher also played an active role in bringing the railroad to eastern Butler County. Maud, Westchester, and Gano soon grew around their respective stations with new flour and paper mills. Mail service to these communities went from bi-weekly stagecoach delivery to daily railroad delivery. While the route was short, it was slower than the CH&D between Cincinnati and Dayton, as Robert Schumacher had predicted in 1850. The issue was partially addressed by a 1911 reconstruction. Large embankments leveled the road between Maud and Middletown. A new bridge over the Miami River north of Middletown eliminated a few speed-reducing curves through Franklin. However, the old main line was retained to support Franklin Industries. Unfortunately, the new work above Middletown would fall to nature's fury. The short line was eventually merged into New York Central, which became the disaster known as Penn Central. And aside, Penn Central was America's worst corporate fraud until Enron in the early 2000s. Conrail restored the line to function before handing over the reins to Norfolk Southern. The 1870s Long Depression weighed heavily on Lebanon as growth stagnated on muddy turnpikes. Asa Coleman sought to change the city's fortune via railroad, but his enthusiasm was met with skepticism from 2 decades of failures. This time, Asa Coleman concluded, would be different, as the railroad would be built using the ultra-cheap hipster 3-foot 0-inch narrow gauge along a path toward the CC&I that barely clipped Butler County's southeast corner. Coleman's gang kicked off construction for Lebanon's third railroad adventure in late 1876 during the Long Depression. Some dirt was moved and little else occurred before the effort met its demise in April 1879. Miami University alum Calvin Bryce bought Asa Coleman's $700,000 dream in April 1880 for $61,000, renamed it the Cincinnati Northern, and built the road by May 1881 into Norwood. Unfortunately, Calvin Bryce's managerial excellence was no match to operate a labor-intense railroad against established Cincinnati to Dayton lines. Surely, the self-appointed king of narrow-gauge railroading and hubris connoisseur Sylvester Nealand could save the line. Nealand's Toledo, Cincinnati, and St. Louis gobbled up the line in May 1883 as a part of his grand vision to create a national narrow-gauge system to compete against standard-gauge railroads. His self-aggrandized prophecy soon faded when lenders foreclosed. The Cincinnati Northern, less Calvin Bryce, regained control under a new name, Cincinnati, Lebanon, and Northern Railway. The CL&N changed the track to standard gauge in 1896, prior to becoming a ward of the Pennsy. The 1896 gauge change allowed the CL&N to earn its nickname the Highland Route, as it was the only line between Middletown and Cincinnati not affected by flooding in 1898 or 1913. The flood recovery traffic pushed man and machine beyond exhaustion, resulting in months of emergency track repair. The line remained intact until Penn Central received ICC permission to remove the Butler County section in 1972. Thankfully, enough of the line remains to host the Lebanon, Mason, and Monroe Railroad. The luster of Vanderbilt's Cincinnati extension quickly faded in the 1870s as local businessmen desired a competitor to keep Vanderbilt's prices in check. The second round of Middletown's railroading adventure began in 1881 when local leaders attempted to organize competition against Vanderbilt. However, the impetus was not followed with action. The McCracken LC&D sideshow came and went with a bang and fizzle. Middletown industrialist Paul Sorg took over the situation in 1890 by chartering the Middletown and Cincinnati to build southeast toward the CL&N in neighboring Warren County. Middletown quickly granted the M&C permission to buy land and cross streets protected by watchmen or automatic crossing guards. It is believed the railroad was funded with debt issued by Paul Sorg's Merchants National Bank. The 15-mile route was constructed by December 1892, giving the city a third railroad competitor. However, profitability eluded the railroad, leading to an October 1894 foreclosure sale to new investors who did not fare much better. Middletown's George Verity capitalized on an adept metalworking labor force, fostered under Paul Sorg's encouragement toward developing metalworking industries to found Armco along Middletown and Cincinnati tracks, bringing much-needed freight traffic and profits. Unfortunately, Paul Sorg's 1902 death caused the remaining owners to sell the line to its eastern terminus partner, the Pennsylvania Railroad. Northwest Hamilton industries were isolated from the railroad. Teamsters made daily 2-mile round trips through Hamilton streets to the CH&D or Pennsy Depot, a 5-hour process involving paying crews of laborers to handle the freight at each stop and dozens of wagon teams to cover the last mile. An agreement was reached with Niles Tool Works to use their railroad siding in northeastern Hamilton that significantly reduced travel time. But that dogged extra freight handling remained. This disadvantage spurred West Hamilton flour mill owner Conrad Semler to propose a belt railway through the northwestern city to connect with the CI&W near Millville Avenue. Semler found a champion with Peter Thompson in 1893. The idea was easy. Making it happen was hard. Champion paper mill founder Peter Thompson's influence garnered the railroad permission to cross city streets. The CH&D-owned CI&W permitted the Belt Line to connect at Millville Avenue in November 1895. The final hurdle was cleared when Butler County commissioners gave their blessing to build the railroad in March 1897. Construction was probably completed after Champion's shipping agreement in August 1898, but before the first rail delivery to Champion in November 1898. The Beltline made Northwest Hamilton an attractive location for industry. American Frog and Switch Company opened along the line in 1901. Other companies like Butler County Lumber and Leshner Corporation also prospered by making factory-direct railroad shipments. The Beltline became a CH&D property around February 1907. Smaller companies like Semler Flour Mill benefited from the Beltline. But the smart money said the railroad's champion was on paper. When the champion died, so did the Hamilton Belt Railway. Our last railroad covers two of my favorite subjects, robber barons and hubris. Author Jeffrey Darby wrote, quote, "It often was not the railroad promoter who took the greatest financial risk. It was instead the purchasers of railroad stocks and bonds," unquote. Bostonians William Bradford and Gerald Fernald, with Chicagoan H.A. Christie, convinced investors building the shortest line between Cincinnati and Chicago would become the premier route by taking passenger and freight traffic from the other established trunk lines, including New York Central, Pennsy, and a Monon CH&D partnership. An aside, George Fernald is the namesake of the former nuclear material processing site along the CC&L in Hamilton County. The trio, drinking hubris light, ignored the fact prior attempts all failed due to a lack of online traffic through rural Indiana and Ohio. After all, these hubris-infused robber barons had the Midwest's best railroader, William Bradford. The Eastern railroads paid journalists to portray Bradford's gang as hooligan juvenile upstarts to dissuade investors. Their self-serving efforts ultimately failed to prevent the CC&L starting construction from Cottage Grove, Indiana, toward Chicago in March 1900. It wasn't long before Bradford downed a second hubris light to deal with a lawsuit from the aptly named contractor Loss & Company over non-payment. The court ruled against Loss & Company, sending them into bankruptcy. The Indiana segment opened in May 1902 to blockades by Pennsy, New York Central, and B&O in Chicago, and the CH&D at Cottage Grove, Indiana. An interchange agreement with Illinois Central gave the CC&L access to Chicago, much to the chagrin of a spiteful Pennsy. Bradford opened a Victory hubris light in 1903 to begin construction toward Cincinnati. The CC&L faced two challenges in Butler County: rugged terrain and a construction camp smallpox outbreak near Okeana. Nevertheless, Bradford's fourth hubris light fueled the company to begin operations into Cincinnati 13 months later in February 1904. The line, like all prior attempts, was a failure. Local traffic was non-existent, and through freight never developed beyond a daily priority produce train. Bradford opened a fifth hubris light to deal with mounting debt. In 1905, William Bradford convinced the CH&D, led by Eugene Zimmerman, into purchasing his defunct debacle at a premium. The CH&D sent money to Bradford, who failed to turn over CC&L stock certificates, allowing a successful CH&D court argument to nullify the purchase. Maybe Bradford should have cut back on hubris light. Bradford cured his sadness by judge shopping while sipping hubris light. A sympathetic Nashville, Tennessee judge made the CH&D pay Bradford $400,000 as a consolation prize. The 1907 recession made the CC&L unable to pay interest on its debt, leading to a foreclosure lawsuit from Bradford's BFF, George Fernald. The CC&L remained in receivership for 2 years until the C&O purchased it at foreclosure auction. The line remained intact until Queensgate Yard construction necessitated removing the Cheviot Hill trestle on July 16, 1978. Today, the Indiana Eastern operates the line between Boston, Indiana, and industries around the Fernald Nature Preserve. The CC&L was the last of 10 railroads to build 136 miles through Butler County, lending credence to Ohio's second moniker, the Transit State. Initially, Butler County railroads were used as a public roadway for a casual stroll or driving livestock to market. Some intrepid souls altered horse-drawn wagons to ride the rails. The public disregard for railroad safety lasted until a blind woman was killed by a train while walking CH&D's line in 1852. Ohio lawmakers realized numerous laws were required to protect train passengers from errant cows and a carefree public with warning signs, gates, and locomotive whistles. The railroad depot brought community status and growth. Large, opulent designs with separate waiting rooms for women and children and men, diner, and newsstands were found at major junctions. Smaller towns hosted a combined depot. Freight was handled on one side, while passengers waited in a room with stove and a community drinking water bucket on a corner table. Politicians on the campaign trail, including Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and Teddy Roosevelt, also converted the depot into a makeshift event center. The railroads also brought affordable travel to local leisure destinations like Talawanda Springs near College Corner or Woodsdale Park on the Miami River across from YMCA Camp Campbell Guard. Cincinnatians could take an hour-long train ride to Hamilton for dinner and return the same evening. Unfortunately, not everyone accepted the changes brought by the Iron Horse. A Hamilton man sued the CH&D in the 1870s for making noises, shaking, disjointing, disturbing, generating noxious vapor, smoke, and filth. The state Supreme Court told the man to simmer down and live with it. Fear also drove some to believe people spontaneously combusted at 60 miles an hour. Early railroad travel was an experiment between faith and calamity. A conductor's watch was the most important on-train safety device, as he was responsible for ensuring the train arrived on time at each location listed on the timetable. However, the timetable didn't completely address all of the time issues, as every U.S. city prior to 1883 had a different idea when 5 p.m. happened. Frankly, the U.S. did not need a standardized time system until railroads linked communities. Several deadly train accidents gave birth to our modern time zone system in November 1883. Butler County's deadliest train accident in July 1910 near Middletown was the result of a conductor with a bad watch and trains not following orders. Telegraph and later telephone wires were strung on poles along the tracks so dispatchers could send train orders to stations that were hooked up to passing trains. These communication systems generally improved safety and track capacity. However, train crews still lacked real-time communication with dispatchers and station agents. A cab radio would have certainly prevented the January 1910 collision in Hamilton between a stalled local coming off the Hamilton belt and a regular freight climbing west. A train crew's horror of facing an unavoidable collision is unimaginable. These ghastly events drew thousands from their homes to witness the drama unfold. Train wrecks were entertainment before radio, TV, and the internet. While the railroad could guard against man and machine, it could do little to quell nature. The Miami River system defines the county's geography and human habitation. Railroads use the gently sloping banks to reduce construction and operational costs at the risk of an occasional destructive flood. An 1802 flood caused the Miami River to create a new river channel just south of New Miami. The old river channel was later repurposed as a hydraulic canal to Hamilton. December 23, 1852 brought the first flood to disrupt railroad service on the CH&D between Hamilton and Middletown. Elk Creek and Twin Creek added their own take on how to destroy a bridge several times between 1853 and 1867. The ill-tempered 7 Mile Creek caused the CH&D and Pensy grief in 1875 and 1899 respectively. These incidents were nature's test for the big show over a fateful week in March 1913 when 9 to 10.5 inches of rain fell across the region. 60 years of railroad-delivered prosperity was washed away in minutes. Every bridge across the Miami River, except CH&D's New River Bridge near New Miami, was destroyed. 7 Mile Creek paid similar service to the Pensy between Richmond, Indiana, and New Miami, Ohio. Floodwaters reached deep into communities, taking man, animal, buildings, business, hope, food, and drinking water with her ferocity. The real toll would not become evident for days, weeks, and even months, as receding floodwater revealed a new modernity. The Pennsy restored Richmond to Hamilton operations by mid-April, and the Big Four and CH&D recovering their lines shortly thereafter. However, it was the Highland route that proved railroaders and their machines could lift a county out of her darkest hour. Early railroaders John Woods, Henry Earhart, Andrew DeGraff, and John Irwin led Butler County on a quest into an undiscovered country of hard lessons on steel slivers where 1,000 little things work harmoniously to move the world. The horse and iron era gave way for steam and steel to imprint unique stories into Butler County's legacy. The railroad allowed industries like Champion Paper, Armco, and Niles Tool Works to reach the national marketplace. Communities filled with schools, libraries, hospitals, doctors, groceries, barbershops, restaurants, and merchants sprang up around every railroad depot in the county. Men and women from afar traveled the high steel to find love and family in Butler County. Their unions gave birth to new generations to watch high school football, school plays, serve, and be served by neighbors. The CH&D made Hamilton flourish, linked Butler County's breadbasket along the E&H with the nation, and helped the Junction Railroad bring students to Miami University, including Calvin Bryce, who later built the CL&N. The Hamilton Belt was Champion Paper's lifeline. The Vanderbilts and Pennsy brought a dependable standard of care to the eastern townships. The C&O saved Okeana and Shandon's connection with the world. So the next time you're trackside, allow yourself a moment to imagine what our ancestors thought of that majestic iron stallion gliding across the steel with a whoosh, pulling Senator Thomas Worthington's vision of an America united through commerce. Thank you for spending time with me this evening to learn how steam met steel in Butler County, Ohio.
Thank you so much for watching tonight's presentation. To learn more about the Cincinnati Railroad Club and to become a member and check out our blog, visit our website, cincinnati.rrclub.org. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more programs like this.